how to build your VFX team, how to find VFX artists. Help me.
Let's do it. I'll walk you through it.
What are the things you're looking in the portfolio of VFX artists?
Crazy, wild, cool thing.
How does the collaboration with the VFX artist should look like?
You're going to need somebody in-house who
30 iterations into a visual effects and you're like, you know what? I just don't want to do this anymore.
Challenge accepted. I'll make it look good from every angle.
What is translatable?
We see people transitioning from Unity to Unreal pretty frequently.
Well, in my head, it was looking a certain way and it's not looking this way.
Any effect we look at in our entire game, if it is these two things,
Hi everyone, my name is Ninel Anderson. I'm CEO of Devoted Studios and I'm your host at Devoted SpeakEasy. Today we have an amazing guest, Jason Kaiser. Hi Jason.
hey, how's it going?
I think today's show is going to be so selfish for me because I want to learn so much. Jason, if you guys don't know him, he, I think one of the biggest contributors to the current growth of and feeling the pain and the need of VFX industry and video games. So I plan to learn a lot. I hope if you're looking to learn how to build your VFX team, how to grow your VFX team, how to find VFX artists, what to do with all of that stuff, and kind of learn why is it not working in the industry, I would love for you to tune in, subscribe, and let's get it rolling. Jason, you've been in the industry for 18 years now, right?
Yeah, yes. Oh gosh, yes. It's a lot. When you say it out loud, it's a lot.
Can you walk me through and our guests through some highlights of your experience and the projects that you worked on that make you so good to talk about the topics that we're going to talk today?
While I was in school, I had the pleasure of studying under a guy named Ryan Woodward. Ryan studied under a guy named Michel Gagne. And if you know 2D effects animation, those two are standout individuals from back in the days at like Warner Brothers, 2D animation like The Iron Giant and Space Jam and films like that. And really before that, I hadn't even thought of doing effects. And Ryan was my introduction. And I was like, wow, I thought I wanted to maybe do character animation or storyboarding or something like that. And I fell in love with effects under his guidance. And so that was really my start. And so I had, top tier teacher. I felt really fortunate for that, which led to some local jobs. I was just working while I was in school. I got a job at a studio working on a game called Animal Jam.
I worked on that too. I love that one.
Yeah, Animal Jammers.
Like my team worked on that for a very long time. So kudos to Animal Jam team.
So really loved my time there and really got deeper into 2D effects in Flash. Before Flash was canceled, it was the platform we launched on. It was full 2D. I was learning some scripting at the time as well, an action script, and really just pushing myself. I was doing freelancing things and doing a lot of late nights, just trying out educational content, working with like a local sort of like homeschool, online school kind of program, doing an animation class for them. So yeah, then from there, I was just applying around at studios, applied to Riot Games. They took a chance on me because at the time I didn't really have much 3D effects experience, and they really wanted an injection of like 2D sensibilities and 2D effects style. And so they did and taught me 3D effects on the job. This is no longer the case at Riot. They would probably never do the same thing again, but I was lucky and I got in at a good time. And from there I grew and became a full-fledged handcrafted effects artist. And I was there for 6 years and started VFX Apprentice while I was there during the last couple of years. And then I left Riot. Still a lot of really great friends there, a lot of great memories. And I left Riot to move on to just do this full time. And now I teach at VFX Apprentice and I run a school online internationally. And we do consulting with other studios that are looking for support in effects training, leveling up their artists, or outsourcers or contractors, whatever it is that they need, while also teaching students and beginners how to find their way into the world of effects.
Well, thank you so much for contributing to making our industry better in the first place. Yeah, I'm sure like companies like Riot might not be investing as much in teaching, but there's all the rest of the world that I feel like are still struggling to find effects artists. So I found one of your quotes earlier, I think this was a couple of years ago, that it's not a talent pool, it's a talent puddle. And most days that puddle is totally dried up. There's exactly 0 college degree program specialists in game VFX. Did that situation change over the last 2 years? Do you feel like there's a difference and things are happening in the industry? I run a co-development company. We have a lot of clients that come to us and are like, hey, Ninel, do you have VFX artists? And I'm like, not enough to give away unless there's like a larger production, right? So, and people are like, oh, well, why don't you like build a VFX department in your company? And I'm like, where do I find them? I mean, there's literally maybe like 3 companies in the world that specialize in visual effects, and they're like 2-3 years booked out, right? With absurd prices. So why do you think there is such a shortage of VFX artists, and can we bridge that? Is there ways to find them?
This was what I set out to do. So I was at Riot and I was sitting in on, panels reviewing incoming candidates for effects artist positions. And I just kept seeing the same story over and over again. This person has raw potential. They could be great, but they don't have the experience and they aren't hitting the style and they don't exactly know what they don't know. And, I'm the type, let's invest in education. That's always been what I've loved is education. So I was like, hey, let's teach them internally. Let's build the program internally and tried for that. And it just didn't ever line up with the goals of the company because Riot and other companies at a similar scale and scope, they don't have as much of a challenge finding the talent that they need. They still have a challenge of their own. I mean, I saw it from inside. They still could be hiring much faster, but they just never opted for that. And so I think that's a challenge where the studios who would have the resources to teach, to train, don't necessarily have the will to do it because it just doesn't make sense business-wise. It doesn't make sense on paper, at least not in the short term, to say, yeah, let's invest in training up all these external people who then might go to work at other studios. And so we've invested this money and now they're gone. And how many of those can we hire? And running a school is its own business. So I started this out kind of naively and I was like, yeah, I'll just build a training program. We'll train people. It'll be great. No problem. Effects especially is so multifaceted. To really cover it all, we aren't even covering it all. And we've been in business for over 5 years. And so it's really become a long-term challenge for me to figure out what is that curriculum, what is that program.
You have continuous deadlines, right? And training people doesn't always align, with hitting those deadlines. So what do you do if you're like mid-tier company and you need to get visual effects artists? And I know that you support and train and mentor and provide services to those types of clients. What do you recommend? What do I start? Do I go on ArtStation, hire some juniors and train them? Do I, do a bidding war for an artist? What do I do?
Well, the first thing you got to understand, and you're saying it, is you got to be out of the box. You got to think in unconventional ways because the circumstances surrounding effects artists and talent that can make stunning, stylized, or realistic effects is just it's an insanely small group of people. And so you can't approach it the same way. I always joke with people, think of it like you're trying to catch a jackrabbit in the forest. You don't just rush at it with everything you've got and just throw more at it to catch it. You have to be clever. You have to be thoughtful and mindful of this thing has a million other places it could go. Where might it go? What can I anticipate? How can I plan ahead in order to sort of catch the rabbit? And it's like catching your effects artist is the same way. It's they have all these options of places they can go and there's not very many of them. And so you have to treat each one in a very bespoke custom sort of way. And so a lot of what I've done is I always say, like, we don't just run a school, we run an ecosystem. And the ecosystem is designed to help with every stage of the pipeline of growing an effects artist, of finding effects artists, of training them, of onboarding them, of helping them succeed after they're in the studio. Everything from the very beginner of like, I don't know how to use a game engine, all the way up to, yeah, I've done a different style before, but now I'm on a different game with a new style. How do I adapt? How do I change for that? What is going to support me in doing that? That's the ecosystem that I've been building with my team at VFX Apprentice. It's really sort of our mantra is, the different parts of it all feed off each other, just like you think of a rainforest. It's like the trees need the water, needs the bugs, needs the birds, needs the mammals, and so on and so forth. And it all just sort of comes together as a mutually beneficial arrangement. And that's how we've had to structure. It's very unconventional. It's very sort of innovative in a way, but that's not just for funsies. It's because we had to. Because if we just did a conventional school that was very like deterministic input and output, and that's, always what it consistently is, that's not going to meet the needs of all the different studios and artists that we work with. So we've had to be adaptable, and I'm really proud of that. Some days I'm pulling my hair out because it's so complicated. We've built a bit of a hydra that comes at it from so many different angles, so many different topics and effects to cover. But that's also what I love. My ADHD side enjoys that it's a complicated problem to solve. And we're tackling it every day and learning all the time. Every new studio client we get has a new perspective, and we grow with them and we adapt for them, because no two teams are the same, no two game projects are the same. They all work differently, they all look different, they use different platforms. They have different optimization constraints and style constraints. And so, yeah, it's a very big world that I've stepped into, like I said, naively at first. And now I just smile when people are like, oh, we want to build an effects training program. I'm like, all right, let's go. Let's do it. I'll walk you through it, because that's like my jam. And that's just what I do day in and day out.
Let's unpack finding artists, because I feel like that's the biggest challenge. I mean, I go to like XDS or GDC, and pretty much every second meeting, people are like, but do you have VFX artists? Because we need some, right? So it sounds like doesn't matter what size of the company people have, they're consistently are looking for visual effects support. So let's imagine I'm an art director. I'm working on, let's say, a AA stylized project. What do I do? I need like 3 VFX artists. What do I do? Where do I go? Where do I find them? How long is the process? What should I expect? Is there pockets or places in the world where it's more successful? Like, help me.
Well, there's a lot there. Again, I think, where they live in the world is going to determine salary expectations. And so that's the number one thing that you have to look at. What can you afford for your project? This comes up all the time, and it varies widely from United States West Coast versus other regions in the world that are up and coming, developing economies. So we see that if you have the budget to do it, then there's usually a senior, we have a referral program that we run because we have a full network of alumni and other professional contacts, and we run referrals with studios all the time. So you can reach out if you're curious. We'll just send them your way. If you don't hire them, you don't pay, it's fine. But the key there is like, you have to know going into it, what are your salary expectations? Because I have friends and colleagues who are senior level who are looking for work, but they're stateside, they're senior level, their salaries are going to be quite pricey, right? That's going to be pretty high end. We have students in parts of the world all over that are just trying to get their first job in the industry. That's going to be the other extreme end of the spectrum. It's going to be very affordable to hire that person, and they're going to be very happy with their quality of life needs and so on, getting their foot in the door. That salary is going to be very different. So we can hook you up with that. But then the downside of there, of course, is they may not have production experience. They may not have as much going on there. And so something that I like to do, and I always propose this, and it doesn't work for every studio, which I totally get, but I'll say, look, how about you hire the junior folks, the hungry ones, the ones that are driven and pushing and doing some really exciting things at an early stage. I always say their growth curve is like really steep. It's like climbing quickly. So if you map that out, if you project that out into the future, in a year or two from now, they're going to be stellar. They're going to be incredible because they're already so hungry. Let's hire some of them. And to mitigate the issues with them not having as much production experience, my team and I can come in and actually coach them through their first year or first 6 months or whatever it is that you want to do as a growth plan for them. And we come in as a supplement externally to check in with them, do reviews, do paintovers, do coaching to help them improve. And that way you can get the best of both worlds where you're hiring a junior level person, but you're still getting the mentorship that they need in-house by spending that extra bit in the short term. But then in the long term, I mean, we've done our job properly if you can fire us. Like it's like a good tech artist kind of works themselves out of a job. A good effects mentor should do the same, I feel. Like, we want them to succeed on their own 2 feet without us being too heavy-handed in the long run. So that's the out-of-the-box kind of stuff that I'm talking about, where even with hiring, it's not just as simple as, oh, look under that rock over there. It's like, okay, yeah, like you can look under the rock over there, but there's a bunch that you have to consider with that rather than just pouncing on them and hiring them. It's not that simple.
And I love it. I mean, I feel like having an access to a school that, and we've worked with a bunch of schools as well, like finding those little gems everywhere in a different pocket of the world. And I love that approach. Is there any other ways that I could find a VFX artist? Is ArtStation a good place? Because we run a platform called Fusion by Devoted. We have like at least 30 or 40 VFX artists that we were able to get on the platform. You could see their portfolio and hire them there. Do you know any other places where there is a little puddle of VFX artists? And if so, how would you search for them there? And like, what is a successful strategy?
So there's also realtimevfx.com, which is our community's forum. It's a free forum that we all gather on and congregate on and share information with. I think ArtStation is good. What's funny is that artists are not always the best at marketing themselves. So like in our portfolio bootcamp, that's actually something we spend like a week or two on, is like, okay, let's get your ArtStation page so that it's actually like updated and easy to browse and connected to your LinkedIn account so they can easily like understand who you are and what you're capable of. It's just funny because we are so passionate about making it that oftentimes we forget to put ourselves out there. I mean, you can just go to my LinkedIn page and look through my LinkedIn contacts. Like, it's full of effects artists on there. You can look at Twitter, who we're tagging on our Twitter account over at VFX Apprentice and the Real-Time VFX handles as well. You can look within ArtStation. We have a school page on ArtStation with a lot of our students featured there as well. I mean, we're kind of just all over the place. Like featuring student work as best we can. We do an annual student reel if you're looking for that. My favorite go-to though is definitely LinkedIn. I mean, my algorithm is very finely tuned for me, so I probably see more people coming up open to work than most people. But yeah, I mean, to me, LinkedIn is a great spot to keep an eye out for that little green tag on the portrait, open to work. And then if it's an effects artist, I always get super curious because we've always got studios looking and I'm always like wondering what's current, and it's rotating all the time.
So if I'm an art director on a AA stylized project, and let's say, I, as an art director, my specialty is concept art, right? So I might not be as well versed in visual effects, and just that hasn't been my career path. How do I hire? Like, what are the things that I need to be looking at when reviewing portfolios? I mean, again, when you were at Riot sitting on a panel being a visual effects artist yourself, like you can find those little, like when it comes to concept art, for example, like those little anatomy things, that matter, and you can spot them easily when you're a concept artist, right? What are the things that you're looking in the portfolio of VFX artists that kind of determine that this artist is going to be successful on the team or not? Maybe not necessarily,
Well, there's something universal. If you're looking for a strong effects artist, they're going to need good timing skills. And that's going to be especially challenging if your background is in, like, let's say, non-animated media. So like concept art, environment art, character design, that kind of thing, even character modeling and so on.
So you're saying that ideally that artist comes when they switch to VFX, they were animators before. That's like a strong plus. Is that?
Perhaps. I mean, a lot of us, like I said, a lot of us tripped into this because there is no formal training program with a degree for it. But my advice to someone who is an art director that has those kinds of backgrounds, that they're not an animator, I would lean on someone in your studio if you can, or someone you trust that has animation skills or even audio design skills. A lot of times we forget about our audio design friends, but they have excellent sense of timing, and they're really great at understanding what makes good timing and what has good feel and punch and rhythm and things. So I think bringing them in as experts, if you don't already have an effects artist in-house, can be a great way to go. But the reason why I harp on timing so much is because it takes a really long time to teach. I mean, just like learning how to draw at a fundamental level takes a really long time to learn or teach. Timing is the same way. You don't just pick up timing on the job in a couple of months. This is like a full course of study kind of thing. This is like you go to school to learn good timing for a while, for many months, maybe even a couple of years, before your timing starts really getting dialed in, you get a good sense for it. I always liken it to music. And again, this is like a shout out to our audio friends. Think about how long it takes to learn an instrument. That's how long it takes to learn good timing. This is not something, you don't just pick up a violin and you're like, yep, I can play. It's like, no, there's a technical aspect to playing an instrument for sure, but to make it feel non-technical when you're playing it, to make it feel organic and flowing and beautiful and rhythmic and all these things, that takes time. And timing is exactly the same for our effects to not feel mechanical, to not feel technically bound and rigid. We need long hours of study and practice to really nail good timing. And so, yeah, I would say hire for that above all else. Even if it's a realistic style, like nature has strong timing. An explosion goes from nothing to a massive cloud instantaneously. That's very, what we would call exaggerated timing, but it's actually realism. So even if you're doing a hyper-realistic style, you need good timing skills in your artists. Even if they're not drawing anything by hand, they're not being artistic in some of these other ways, the art of timing is its own skill that you really need to watch out for.
So timing sounds like number one. What are the other top, I don't know, 3-5 things that you would be looking at? You're looking at the portfolio of the artist and you're like, he's the jam, or not hiring this one.
Yeah, this goes to a lot more nuance. This is where I start getting in trouble because I'll give advice and inevitably somebody will say, that's not right. That's not the important thing. This is more important, or that. Because again, every studio is so different. And I respect that. I say, yeah, that's totally valid. Totally agree with you. I wish I could say that they were all equally weighted, but like, that's not how it is per studio. So for example, a studio that's publishing for mobile devices and Switch, they're going to be really cognizant about optimization. And so that portfolio better not be showing hundreds, thousands of particles flying around and like really complex shaders and lots of overdraw and all this other stuff going on, which you can see. The trained eye can tell in a demo reel if that's what's happening, because it's just not, those skills aren't going to translate very well to what their optimization constraints are. Another studio is going to care a whole bunch about competitive integrity and clarity. They need their effects to clear the gameplay space pretty smoothly and quickly, but also land a lot of punch and clarity on where the AoE is hitting. And they're going to care a ton about that. Other games might be like, oh, this is a single player game. The clarity isn't as important as the immersion. Things need to feel volumetric. It needs to like feel very ambient and like it's connected to the environment and kicking up dust and all these things. And so we kind of get all over the place at this point. And this again speaks to like, how do you build a curriculum to teach this? And what are the things you start with? And I'm like, well, you kind of got to cover a lot of ground because it really depends on where the artist wants to work. And that has become a meme within our community, is that it depends. We have like a little emoji on our Discord server.
It depends.
It depends. Because we say it so many times.
No, I'm absolutely fascinated, and I actually want to learn more because you're using the terms that, competitive integrity for visual effects. Like, what is that? Like, what is important for like a MOBA and a MMO game, where there's a bunch of players like slashing and killing each other, and versus, we're talking about a game like Journey.
Okay, so think about you're playing a single player game, and the boss that you're fighting has a sword slash that comes out in an arc toward you. And the arc kind of collided with you a little bit visually, but you dodged. You didn't get hit. You didn't take any damage. So visually, you were like right there at the edge of it, and it kind of even like went through you. That feels great because you're like, whoa, I barely dodged that attack. I feel amazing. But then in a multiplayer game, that same scenario where another player now is swiping at you with a sword swipe, and there's a very clear edge to that arc of the swipe toward you, and it clips through you visually, but you don't take any damage. How's that player going to feel? You might still feel great because you dodged it, but the other player is going to be freaking pissed because they're like, my sword hit the guy and it didn't do damage. I didn't finish. Like, oh, that's BS. It's terrible. And they just like rage quit. They throw their keyboard, etc. So that's what I mean by competitive integrity. Is we as the visual effects artists need to maintain the competitive integrity and the clarity of what exactly happened and where it happened and why it happened and who it happened to and all those things. And it needs to be pretty precise. And we don't want to obscure that with too many other effects covering it up. Nothing feels worse than dying in a big team fight that was just masked over completely by explosions, and you can't even tell what hit you, who hit you. And some of the clearest games in the world, like Overwatch and Marvel Rivals, still run into this problem where it's like, when things get crazy and everybody's firing off their big abilities and everything else in a big fight, you kind of don't always know. At least us regular gamers, these newbie gamers, like that we aren't pro level, we don't always know what killed us, and that's frustrating. So we got to try our best in those types of games to maintain that.
That sounds like you can be the artist or the only person on the team that then all the comments and all the bad feedback on Steam is about you, because everything else works really great, but I can't really see what's going on the battle.
I think the game balance designers get it worse than us. To be fair, those brave souls, they're on the front lines of player feedback.
So whenever I'm talking to people about, they're like, oh, I can hire a VFX artist on outsource and like have them remote and and work in isolation. And for me, I always feel like that's a kind of a slippery slope, because VFX artist needs to work so closely with a designer, because it is like, what is that the emotion that was intended here? Like, is that creating the experience? What do you think? How does the collaboration on the team with the VFX artist should look like? Is there like an idea of this, a super correct process there? Like, how do you see it?
You're going to need somebody in-house who knows effects and knows how to manage effects. I think if you don't, then that person is going to have to be included as a part of the outsourcer that you're hiring. So like there are outsourced studios that are fully capable of leading and managing the entire effects pipeline from their end. And you can reach out to them and you can work with them. I know
3 years from now, usually. Like that's how booked out they are. So
yes, and they are booked out. So they do exist and they are booked. They've gotten rather picky, and they should, because it's a high demand thing. So outside of that, You're going to need an expert that can wait. This is honestly where we come in. This is honestly like the service that I keep coming back to, is like, that's why the guidance is so critical, because you don't know what you don't know, and effects is the experience of the player. And so it's pretty centralized. All the other things kind of plug into it and neighbor it in some way. And so if you don't know what that is, and you hire someone in-house who's more junior level, or you have an outsourcer who is more junior level and not really super strong in the communication loop skills, that poor person is going to be at the intersection and pressure point of many different points of feedback coming toward them. And the art director, and I've seen this many times, like a great art director and a great game director or game design lead will come with absolutely opposing feedback, not knowing that they're opposing each other, not seeing why the two are incompatible, but they leave that at the feet of the effects artist to sort out, thinking, I gave my feedback, I gave my notes, now they just need to do that thing and we'll be fine. Prime example is, like we've been talking, like art director coming in, hey, this really needs to be full of personality, it needs to be kind of like packed with punch and all these other buzzwords that we've got going on, born of the spirit realm and having all this epic whatever, whatever it is that the creative design and direction of the game is. And then the game designer is coming in and saying, hey, we need this to clear the gameplay space immediately because it's not actually at a high power level to justify it lingering around. It doesn't have any after effects once it's hit. We just need it to kind of hit and go away. And and it needs to be an instant cast as well, so there's no wind up to it either. So it needs to hit instantly and then go away relatively quickly and clear the space. And that poor artist is left in the middle of that. And if they don't have strong communication skills or an advocate to kind of help bridge that gap between design and art, they're just going to be sad. And we see this a lot actually with our effects community. A lot of us on the forum are talking about this. We have like I said, the Discord server, people coming, help, please. Like, I don't know what to do. I feel so stuck and trapped. Again, a really talented art director, a really talented game designer, both know their fields very well, but effects lies at the intersection of those fields. And we can be put under some unexpected, unintended pressure, I think, on a regular basis without strong leadership in place to kind of like mitigate that or moderate that.
I had a project like that, and like this conversation is triggering PTSD, where it's like, oh, this visual effects looks great at this angle, but at this angle it needs to be the same. And you're like, well, first of all, the player are not going to see it at this angle, and why are we putting more time into doing it? And second of all, you can make it, because it's a 3D effects, it's in order for it to look at this angle, it needs to have a certain structure, and it's different. It can't look, and it's like, no, we have to make it equal 360. And you're like 30 iterations into a visual effects, and you're like, you know what? I just don't want to do this anymore. Like, I don't know how often visual effects artists walk away from the jobs in your experience. Like, what do you see in the industry, like being stuck in those moments?
I've seen the full spectrum. I mean, some individuals really thrive in that, and they're like, challenge accepted. I'll make it look good from every angle. Watch me go, And I've also seen, sadly, I've seen a lot of effects artists lose their edge, their confidence. Because, again, especially to a junior level person, they see a very talented art director and a very talented game design director, and they're both giving me notes, so this must be doable. And I should be able to do it. Why can I not do it? And they don't understand that, like, it doesn't matter how seasoned and experienced they are at what they do. They can still disagree with each other. They can still not be fully aware of the needs of the other department. And then that falls on the effects artist, who I think more often than not, we see effects artists losing their belief in themselves and their own talents and their own ability. It's really sad to watch. And I'll be on calls with them. Like, if anyone out there is struggling, just reach out. We'll get on a call. I'll build you right back up. Because, like, honestly, 99.9% sure it is not your fault. And it's not necessarily your art director's fault either. I don't mean to point blame somewhere else, but like, there is a pathway forward, and it comes through hard-earned experience. So many of us have been through the ringer on this, caught in the middle, and we have a community now. We can support each other now and coach through, like, there is a way through it. I don't remember your question, but I wanted to make sure I called that out because I know people out there are struggling, and no, they don't quit. More often than not, they don't quit. They feel worn down and worn out, but they don't usually walk away because that has a tendency to erode one's self-confidence and view of their abilities.
So how would you coach a company that has that, might, like, they come in as a client, right? And they have that issue that, the game design doesn't necessarily agree with art direction. VFX artists are caught in the middle, or you just, you come in and you see, oh, VFX takes 30, 40 iterations to hit the mark, and game design and art director blames VFX that they're not really grasping what needs to be done. And you're looking at it and you're like looking at the notes and seeing, oh, the notes are just so vastly different. How would you coach the company? Like, how do you build that alignment? What is missing for this situation to happen?
We have a patent-proven method of fixing this problem. No, it is a little different per studio, because it might be that the effects artist has a skill mismatch, that they're really good at a certain style, but maybe they're having trouble hitting the exact style the studio's doing. That could be a thing. And that doesn't mean it's a bad effects artist. It just means that it's not the right fit for that. And then they need to find a job where they can really nail the style. So that can be a thing. It could be a lot of things, but what it usually is a mismatched set of expectations, like we've been talking about. And to fix that, we come in and we establish pillars. We talk about a common language to speak about effects. This is different than a style guide. Everyone thinks, oh, build your style guide. That's how you fix alignment issues. There's something that predates the style guide. It comes more foundationally below the style guide, and that's the pillars. And you only want 2, maybe 3 pillars. Very easy to remember, very easy to give feedback on, and you get everyone aligned. It's like, okay, any effect we look at in our entire game, if it is these 2 things, it is a good effect. Yes or no? And if it's not both of those things, then it's a bad effect. Not a bad effects artist, not a bad art director, the effect is bad for our game. That's it. Might be good for a different game, it's bad for our game because we agreed on these pillars. And so I work really thoroughly with the team for however long it needs to take to establish alignment around those 2, maybe 3 pillars. I say maybe 3 if it's like a really big, complicated game that has like a lot of variety and a lot of scope to it. But usually you only need 2 pillars.
Can you give me an example of like what could be the pillars? What could be the pillars for like a realistic game? What could be pillars for, let's say, League of Legends? What could be pillars for Valorant? So people can have some North Stars when they're developing it internally. Usually
they have a little bit of buzzword to them, but the words need meaning and they need alignment around the meaning. So it could be like crystal clear clarity above all else. Or it could be, oozing with personality from every corner. Or it could be grounded to a world seated in believability. Or it could be like packed with emotion and excitement and thrill. Or, it's just something to like, to ask yourself, does this effect have this? Is this effect embodying this? Yes or no? And so it should be clear enough, concise enough that it's a simple question when you're doing a review. Is this effect we're looking at doing this? And if it's not, then we need to make edits to get it there. Now, that's the thing. The edits that you make, that's the style. That's the optimization. That's the nuts and bolts of it, right? It's like, it's not doing these things because it needs more of whatever we do in our style. Great, go do that. And then it's very clear to the artist and it's very clear to everyone in the room what the expectation was. Because as long as it hits that pillar, we can't say, oh, it's a bad effect, change it some more because I, my kid this morning said he likes games with this kind of thing, so go do that, which I've literally heard in a meeting. I was like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. That's crazy. But like, to get away from that subjective kind of approach where it's like, we think, they think, whatever, you've got to look at it like pillars, yes or no. And that's it.
I have so many questions with regards to that because, again, it hits home for me. I mean, a part of it is like, okay, well, is this effect thrilling and whatever the other buzzwords that you used? Like, again, it sounds still subjective.
No, it's a long discussion to get to something that is clear for everyone. So there isn't a subjectivity. So there isn't a question. It's like, yeah, this does the thing. It evokes what is stated in the pillar. Because
for me, like, I think where a lot of issues with visual effect, and again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is visual effects in general is so subjective and could be done in like 20,000 different ways when it comes to like effects of, even like a fire or explosion or whatsoever, right? And then a game designer or a director, yes, it is an explosion, but I kind of thought it would be a little different. But it's like, you can't really point a clear reference usually. Like, it's not as easy as with like concept art or anything like that. So how do you allow the artist to create the visual effects as they see based on the brief and not have that subjectivity, but also allow other voices to have? I don't know. I feel like VFX is such a iterative currently, unfortunately, in the industry process, unless, again, you have a VFX artist with a very strong voice and it's like, this effect is going to be like this and this is it. And everybody else is like, okay.
Totally.
So, but it's not really the reality of stuff.
So just to clarify, I'm not saying that the effect can only look one way in order to hit the pillar. It's quite the opposite. So given the same pillar, any effects artist in the world is going to make a different effect.
I actually highly agree with you. Like, it shouldn't be looking a certain way. And that's the problem, because everybody else is like, well, in my head, it was looking a certain way and it's not looking this way. And you're like, but I can't describe the way it is looking in my head. It's more of a feeling.
So this is the thing. When I'm working with studios, I'm not saying we need to get aligned on exactly how it's supposed to look. We're getting aligned on whether or not it hits the pillar. That's as far as you can go. It's going to be up to the art director to determine however specific they want to get on how it looks. And if they want to be more specific, there's going to just be more iteration, more back and forth with the artist. If they want to be less specific, that's fine too. We see different styles of art direction. I don't think there's a wrong way to do it. It's just one has more rounds of feedback and one doesn't. It just depends on what you want to do. But the pillars can match up. So it's like, does this effect maintain competitive integrity? Yes or no? It does? Cool. Does it also reflect the personality of the hero who used it in a meaningful way? Yes, it does. Great. It's a good effect. Whether they used yellow, orange, sharp shapes, rounded shapes, whatever they chose to do to pull that off, it doesn't matter in that meeting. That's going to be up to the artist and the art director if they want to change that stuff. But as far as getting alignment across the board with the other disciplines, with game design, with the producers, with whoever is weighing in on this thing, you've got it. You've got agreement. So now it's working. And I think that's the best we can do. I don't think it's wise to try and get everyone's subjective feelings involved for too long. It's fine at some level, but if that's happening and they're feeling like, oh, I feel like it should feel more goopy, or it should feel more zappy, or it should feel more whatever, and that wasn't covered by the pillars, then I think the pillars aren't doing their job. And this is why we spend plenty of time on the pillars, is to capture that. It's like, yeah, like the effects in this game feel goopy. That's important to us. No matter what else they do, they should always feel goopy. Cool. And then if they don't, then it's a bad effect, or it should reflect the element or the theme of the character who used it. And this is a goopy character using it. So then that's another way to capture that. Or this is a zappy character, so his effects should feel zappy, etc.
I feel like you need to create a brief on how to find your pillars in the video game industry and put it out for everyone. And we're gonna be like, "Thank you, Jason."
Well, come and talk. I've got it. We'll talk. We'll set it up.
I feel like I've learned how I can establish a better pipeline when some of my clients come in and, we need some visual effects. And I'm like, never on a fixed price budget, ever. I'm going to be doing visual effects with possible amount of trillion iteration. Beggars are not choosers when it comes to visual effects industry. If I'm looking for an artist, what are the things that I'm like, okay, if they have this, I might be okay and get them on the project? Like, what is translatable? Is the Unity artist, can they do Unreal? The fantasy artist can do stylized. Like, what are the cross sections that I can still hire from?
Yeah, I'll answer the Unity versus Unreal thing first, because that's the most straightforward question. We see people transitioning from Unity to Unreal pretty frequently throughout their careers. The question really is, do you need them to be deeply versed in Unity or Unreal? Like, do you need them to do their own hookups or will a game designer or a tech artist be doing that for them? That really factors in. So if the answer is they need to be able to set up their own scripts and their own events to fire off with the associated effects inside of Unity, but they've only ever worked in Unreal, that's a tall order, I do think, to get them to embrace that. Learning a new particle editor when they already know another particle editor, that's not an issue. I think you can get them ramped up in a relatively short amount of time. It varies by artist, but sometimes 1 to 3 months, something like that, and they're good to go. But if you're saying, now go learn scripting in Unity when they've only ever done visual scripting in Unreal or something like that, I mean, that might be a little better versus if they've never done visual scripting in Unreal with the blueprint system, and now you're asking them to do like scripting in Unity. That's a whole challenge. Now the shaders knowledge will transfer a lot more, so there's not as much to worry about with shaders these days, because they both have a shader editor now that's very similar. So that'll translate. Knowing how to do the hookups from the shader to the particle systems is different from Unity to Unreal, but it's not so vastly different that they'll just never get it. But when it comes to here's a character with animation and a rig, and we need hookups on all of the spells that they're casting from their weapons, and we need it to have a hitbox on the enemy that triggers properly and all these things. And it's you're going to want to make sure they're well supported with a good tech artist and a game designer or an engineer, depending on how your team is structured.
And what about styles? Realistic versus stylized, or some versions of stylized? What could be tolerable?
So a lot of us use Unreal or Unity to make a wide variety of styles. And so if they already know Unreal and now they're transitioning into something different, that's just going to be about how big of a difference that is. So say, for example, they are a 2D effects artist, hand-drawn. You need them to learn simulation software like EmberGen, Houdini, and so on to create 6-point lighting and all these other things. That's going to be quite the journey to transition, because hand-drawn frame by frame is a whole different mindset. It's a whole different skill set from simulation software. That's going to create. They both create flipbooks that you use in the game engine, frame by frame animation, but they're very different use cases in flipbooks. So there's some common ground in the middle of putting it together in the particle system itself. But then say, for example, you're like, well, we already have the flipbooks. So we have someone else who made the EmberGen and Houdini flipbooks for the project. There's a huge library to pull from. And what we need is someone to assemble them together with strong timing, great composition, all the goals of the game. Actually, a lot of the skills are going to translate, because now we're talking about the assembly portion, which is the overlap in between. And that could go either way. If you have a very seasoned Houdini effects artist that's been putting their stuff into Unreal, and you need them to work with hand-drawn flipbooks to get that assembled and composed nicely. We've actually seen this. I know stories of this, of people that have done that, and they were able to do it just fine, as long as they're not drawing the flipbooks themselves. That can transition. But again, it just goes back to like, what is the scope of the job? How much of the job do you need them to do? And again, if you're not familiar with effects, you may not have all the answers there. And so bringing in someone who knows can help clarify, like, can they pick it up? Can they go? The reason that I bring this up is typically with smaller studios, they're like, we don't have any pre-made libraries. We don't have a full pipeline where someone else will do the hookups for them. We don't have the setup there. And then I'm saying, like, yeah, you really do need somebody that either you can be patient with while they learn how to do all those things, or they already can do it, or they have like a guide or a mentor working on their behalf to help them get unstuck. So it's a little more of a challenge if you don't have the mature pipeline.
Yeah, well, it's a bit of a challenge because there's no VFX artist available usually, or available within certain budgets. So
We're
I feel
out
like
there. We exist.
we're compromising on a daily
Don't
basis.
lose hope, Ninel.
I'm not losing hope. I'm just very realistic. And again, I'm really grateful for schools like VFX Apprentice. For somebody needs to do it. You know, it's like the idea when we were building Devoted Fusion as a place for people to being able to hire freelance artists, because we feel like there's so many artists on the market, but who is available, whose skill is relevant to your project. And we wanted to solve a problem of the time it takes, not like weeks of trying to parse our station and find the artists and write to millions of them and then see who responds, and like streamline that. And also for the artists, give them visibility on, there are projects, and it's not scary to be a freelance artist if you choose to be, and you can jump from a project to a project as long as you're passionate and you have good work ethics. So I feel like all of us are fighting the fight of creating a little bit of a better industry on a day-to-day basis, in a place that it's not scary to work us in, because I feel like in the last year and a half, the fear of layoffs is just so overwhelming. And I don't know, I personally think that and I don't know what's your take on it, but I feel like we're getting in the new reality of how the video game development is going to work. And that reality is we're not going to have 600 people studios. We're not going to have 1,000 people studios. We're going to have much leaner team that staff, not even per project base, not even to the company, but like based on the phase of the project. Like on a vertical slice, I need this amount of people, and then I have a break until I find that the edge in the game, and then I need to ramp up people again when it's an alpha, and like, which is a very common way of how people get hired in the movie industry, and have been doing it for 60 years, but it's not really a common way of doing things in a video game. So I feel like we're going to be still going through a lot of pain in the next, 2-3 years. And how do we streamline onboarding? How do we get in a VFX artist on board that can perform day 1, day 2, day 3, not 3 months from now? Like I have, my husband works in the movie industry, and when he gets on a project, day 1, he knows exactly what needs to be done and what everybody else on this project is doing. But in video games, it takes us 3 to 6 months to get onboarded. So, and I don't know how we breach that gap. And I don't know if, you see the ways in VFX to breach that gap.
I think games is it's such a unique beast from film. Film has a very specific goal in mind in the end. I mean, you do see some studios innovating how they produce and what their end product is, and they get really unconventional with it, and they take longer to do it. And, these are the films that win awards, and they stand out as this like really interesting thing. I mean, you look at Arcane, which isn't a film, but it's it's the pipeline of a film. It's just multiple films in one show. And they operated more like a game studio. They got in and broke stuff and redid stuff and did it over again and changed it again and try this and try that. And, it is true, like film gets by on a leaner budget with a leaner time frame. but it's also not as varied and wildly, like it's not a Wild West like games is. Like a new game comes out, it's like, I've never seen anything like that in my life. That's the most unique, bizarre, crazy, wild, cool thing. I don't know how they did that. Like no one knows how they did it. They didn't know how they were going to do it when they started. And I think that's a beautiful thing about games, actually. But it's also a big liability when it comes to a profit model, because it's very risky.
And we're seeing that. I mean, out of 10,000 games that released in Steam last year, 200 made money? I do feel like we need to stop blaming companies for layoffs and the mismanagement. Like we're in the market where people maybe don't want to pay for games or don't pay as much for games, or the competition for the screen time is so big. Like, how do you survive? Like, and I don't know the answer to that question. I'm feeling that whatever has worked before is not working anymore, and we just need to face the reality of it and be open to find that way of how we collaborate as an industry moving forward, without continuously pointing blame. And just my LinkedIn feed is absolutely freaking sad every day. So,
well, I'll say this. The ray of hope that I have is I don't know a group of more innovative, rise to the occasion kind of people than game developers. We are scrappy, and we aren't easily put down to give up. We keep coming back. And I think we see a lot of that now. There's a lot of people hurting, obviously. And there's also a lot of leaders in game development that are like, okay, time to innovate. This is what I've been doing my whole career. I've been innovating from day one. That's what making games is innovation. And so, because if you don't innovate when you're making a game, your game's not fun. Your game, people are like, what is this? Like, this is just like this other game I already played. Why would I care? And so you have to innovate. We're always innovating. And I think, yeah, like it's terrible. And the forces at play are very daunting to go up against. However, I mean, already we're seeing shifts and transitions as people are trying to adapt and figure out, okay, we don't like how it's working. So what are we going to build instead? What are we going to make instead? How are we going to do it? And again, I think the out-of-the-box thinking just comes into play here once more, where it's like, you can't really approach it the same way that you've been approaching previous things. And I think we all need to like take a breath, take a moment and say, what am I missing? What's the opportunity? Because of course we can look at all the downside, and it's hard not to ignore it when you've been laid off. I mean, it's impossible. I mean, you've got needs, basic needs that are not going to be met if you don't get another job. And also, it's a moment of opportunity. I think both are true. I think I live in a world of trying to hold two opposing things in my hands, of like with the art director and the game designer, to come full circle on that. How can both be true? You know, it's a question I ask myself all the time. And I think that's the genesis of a lot of innovation. Rather than assuming that one cancels out the other, how can you be in a situation of upheaval and devastation and disappointment, and also have the whole world in front of you full of opportunity and possibility, and then start joyously looking for those opportunities? How can both be true?
Jason, thank you so much for coming to our show and sharing your wisdom. I'll leave the links to the VFX Apprentice and your guys' forum in the YouTube. Also, anyone who's watching, if you like it, like, subscribe, share, and looking forward to seeing you and creating the content for you guys on our platform.
Thanks for having me, Ninel. It's been a pleasure.